And we are not at war with Islam. We are at war with people who have perverted Islam.
Well, plenty of people applauding the president's refusal to link Islam and terrorism. He'd come under quite a lot of pressure from American right-wingers and Republicans to be rather clearer in that link. Some say, however, that the conference shouldn't have focused solely on Islamist extremists. Let's talk about some of those issues with the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, California chapter, Hussam Ayloush. Very warm welcome to the programme. Would you have applauded those comments had you been there?
Well, certainly we would have applauded, and like many Muslims have applauded President Obama's continuously repeating that the terrorists have nothing to do with Islam. ISIS is actually, their actions, their theology, ideology goes against the teachings of Islam, and they've been condemned again and again by all Muslim scholars. So for that,
right,
he would be condemned. He would be thanked.
You're not actually there, and one would have thought the American Islamic Relations Council would have been a natural invite to D.C., so why are you not there?
Well, I had a chance to meet with the Secretary of Homeland Security to discuss the conference or the summit on countering violent extremism, and I think they might not have liked our position. We have major, serious concerns about the summit itself because of the false premises it's built on. And
Go on, tell us about those.
Well, the main premise is, first of all, that Muslim youth are somehow more susceptible than other youth to violence, or to violent extremism. It singles out the Muslim community with a program and an initiative. When extremism exists in all communities, it's almost like there's an assumption that being Muslim makes someone more of a threat. That is one. The other problems we have is the fact that the whole summit focuses on the role of religion rather than the root causes of terrorism and extremism. And that is a lot of the injustices that the president himself correctly pointed out.
So you're saying there are political causes which get a religious overlay or a religious magnification of some way, and that actually at issue at this conference should be the politics and not the religion?
Or at least both. I mean, to exclude one, to make it all about religion, when religion is usually an afterthought for most of these terrorists. The real problems is the fact that we in the West, including the US and the UK and others, continue to support occupation, repressive regimes,
sure,
military coups that create anger, create extremism, and lead, for some, to violent extremism and terrorism.
Right. Now, the issue of young people and radicalization is an interesting one. You say that it's unfair to single out. Now, I see that in the interests of kind of like clear justice and being fair to everyone, yes, of course, there is somebody could just as likely be influenced by a far-right ideology, by a racist ideology. They could read Che Guevara and be inspired. But if we look at, sorry to use the phrase, facts on the ground, we look at our stories. 90% of our stories are about young men who have been radicalized in the name of Islam. So isn't it fair to focus on that element?
Well, in this case, the story don't tell us the full story, the full picture. If you look at the numbers, statistics from the European Union, from the US, from the FBI's record, actually, the majority of terrorist attacks in Europe and in the US do not involve Muslim youth. But they're not as sensational, so that's why there's a focus on...
What sort of attacks would these be? Sorry, because, I mean, as I say, we cover this stuff day in, day out, and unfortunately, I have to say, the large part of the attacks and so on that we're talking about, just sort of, let's specify our language. Where do you see these other attacks that aren't reported, that aren't inspired by Islam?
I mean, at least in the U.S., the majority of these attacks come from white supremacist groups,
right,
from environmentalist, extremist radicals. In Europe, the same thing. A lot of radicals, a lot of nationalist movement, whether it's the Basque movement, the Irish until very recently. So it's a mixture of things, but obviously religion becomes important when the perpetrators happen to be Muslim or
right.
the Muslim.
Listen, just a very interesting take on the conference, and thanks for talking to us. As a final point, you're not there. Kind of surprised. I'm sort of you couldn't bring yourself to to find some sort of common cause to go there. I'm sorry to hear that. What do you want to come out of the conference? Because it's been trailed, not exactly attacked, but kind of like poo-pooed and dismissed in some quarters as just being a talking shop. You know, you need people on the ground who are going to have effect on de-radicalizing young people. What do you think the conference can realistically achieve?
I think if we can come to terms and agree that we need to address terrorism, because terrorism is real, it kills people, it is bad, it is evil. We need to address it, but not through band-aid solutions, not through political exploitation of the problem, but through really deciding that we need to end our support for policies that are creating and fueling terrorism.
Let me ask you one thing, Hussam, it's Nuala here. Obama also brought up a little later in his speech about people, not Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, but people, other communities, other people buying into the notion that Islam has been polluted by Western values. Do you believe that is a sentiment?
No, there is that sentiment that unfortunately gets exploited by Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The reality is, what we hear is that the West continues to cause the repression of Muslims. And that might not be completely false, considering that we do fund the occupations of Palestine. We do fund and support the military coup, which is continuously oppressing the Egyptians. We do support regimes that are violating human rights, such as the UAE and many others. So for the average Muslim living in that part of the world or somewhere else, they cannot deny these facts. We cannot continue to focus just on the religious inclinations or deviation of these people.
I want to thank you very much indeed for coming in. An interesting perspective, very interesting perspective. As you heard, invited to contribute, but didn't feel that he could take part in that, we shouldn't call it a summit, the conference on extremism and de-radicalization, which President Obama is hosting in Washington. That was Hussam Ayloush, Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, the California chapter.